Have you ever wondered how much money a musician would have to make per show to sustain themselves on a nationwide tour? Well, I've got somebody that's crunched the numbers and you will enjoy this conversation. Welcome, metalheads. I'm the host of Heavy Metal Philosophy and writer for Metal Digest, John Barbas. Make sure you stick around to the end of the episode for this week's Riff of the Week. A long time ago, I used to be in a band with Sarah King. She was the lead singer of the band that we were in, and we toured all up and down the southeastern coast. We played in the panhandle of Florida, all throughout Georgia, all the way up into North Carolina. And at the time, we were kids, and we didn't really keep track of the money. We just were having fun playing rock and roll and trying to play it in as many places as we could. So we knew we were losing money, but we just didn't know how much, and we didn't care. But now, as an adult and as a full-time musician, Sarah has to care about the finances and has to budget a tour and has to worry about merch cuts. And speaking of merch cuts, have you heard the big bands complaining about merch cuts? And have you wondered if the smaller independent artists playing the smaller independent shows also have to pay these merch cuts? Well, I talked to Sarah, who just came off of a nationwide tour all up and down the East Coast, all the way out to Montana and back multiple times, a 3-month tour. So she's got all of those numbers crunched. She goes into great detail on her social media about the math of the tour. So that's a very illuminating and instructive thing to see. And I just wanted to talk to her about it on the podcast. So without further ado, here's my conversation with Sarah King. Sarah King, welcome to Heavy Metal Philosophy.
Thanks for having me.
You are my first ever 2-time guest.
Oh, dang.
So for y'all that don't know, Sarah King is the 2021 NEMA Songwriter of the Year. We used to be in a band together a long time ago, and then she left me down here in the South to go on and pursue bigger and better things.
Sorry, y'all.
It's all good. I'm very happy for all of your success. And in fact, that's one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on again, is because there's been a lot of talk in the live music, rock and roll community lately about touring, about merch cuts. And it really came to a head recently with the Live Nation On the Road Again program announcement. And you have like literally just come off a tour. Like a few days ago, you ended a very long tour, and you've got this, I don't know what to call it. You've got this story that you're telling on social media that's giving the real numbers behind touring that I just think is very illuminating that most people don't know. So I wanted to ask you about some of the numbers of what it takes to tour as an independent musician.
Absolutely. Yeah. Just got back from a 3-month long tour, which is the longest tour. I mean, if you don't count like the 4 days I came home in between. So that barely counts. That's like the length of time I spent at your house on the road. So yeah, 3-month tour. And yeah, like merch cuts and the cost of touring. Before I even left, I was seeing all this chatter on social media from like bands way bigger than me who were like, we're having a tour, turn down tour offers. We're having to cancel tours because we can't make it work financially. And so I'm seeing all that last winter, and I'm like, all right, well, I guess I'm just going to get in the car and go. And I did, because you know me, and I'm kind of foolhardy and stubborn, and I do what I'm going to do anyway. But yeah, I definitely, as I continued traveling this summer, I was finding a lot of people were making comments like, you know, oh, like, have fun out there. And I'm like, yes, but it's also my job. And people were like, wait, what? And I'm like, I'm only paid if I'm on stage. And it was when I said that actual phrase to more than 2 or 3 people, and I would just see jaws drop. And I was like, do you not understand how this works? And so that's why I started doing this little series on social media, because I know that I'm just one person. It's just my own personal experience. So I don't want to speak for everybody, and I don't want to pretend to be the voice of like everyone. So like the United Musicians, Allied Workers are definitely like doing bigger things in organizing, but I'm just, as you said, trying to illuminate the reality for independent musicians. There's like this almost like an expectation out there that people are like, well, you should just be thankful that you get to do what you love for a living. Who cares? Like if you don't even make minimum wage, like you get to play guitar for a living every day. Like that's so cool. Like no, I also want to put a roof over my head and gas in the car and food in my mouth. So
Yeah. If you
yeah,
don't make
there's
enough money, then you have to do something that will make enough money.
yes.
So the music that y'all love doesn't exist. You know.
That's exactly it. Like there are so many musicians that I know and love and respect and whose careers are even much larger than mine who still have 9 to 5 jobs or they pick up odd jobs when they're not on the road. Like I know that I'm in a very fortunate position as a solo artist that my overhead is kind of low and so my costs are a little bit different. However, my costs are about to explode because I'm about to be in a release cycle, right? So I've got to hire publicity and video and buy more merch and all this stuff. So my costs are about to get crazy. This year, being in between album releases, my costs are a little low. And that was one of the reasons I was able to make it work. Now, next year obviously has to be bigger and better, but oh man, like, yeah, I mean, just the publicity and release campaign alone, like, we're looking, people are like, oh yeah, like you made an album, like put it out. Okay. Yeah, I could go put it up on Spotify today, but that's not going to do anything. Like, it costs tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars to properly release and promote an album in order to make a big enough splash to tour off it significantly, get in front of enough people, and make enough money to make the next album. Because if I don't make enough money to make the next record this time, this is it. And so I have to go really big here, and that's also like really scary, knowing that I've got the upcoming release plus all of the normal indie musician budget concerns or considerations.
Right. And, a lot of people have said, oh, why do record labels even exist anymore? Because, we got the internet now, we got home recording, we can do all these things. That's why record labels still exist. That big
Yes.
publicity push is super expensive.
Yeah, it's super expensive, and labels do that. There are a lot of labels now who are also offering things like label services when it comes to publicity and release, where they'll do stuff like that for a flat fee versus hiring you on or like signing you on. Because the big financial risk for labels, of course, used to be the big advance for the recording session. So they could be out hundreds of thousands of dollars just to put you in the studio, and that's a major financial risk. And a lot of labels aren't going to take that on right now. I'm in a unique position where I have already funded the recording. I got some grants and I got some large donations that helped out with the recording, plus all of my savings. And so the recording is done, but now that publicity side is still huge. So it is not like astronomical for a label, even an independent label, to think about spending $100,000 on the recording and another $100,000 on the release. And when I put those numbers out to people, they're just like, well, like you said, like, can't you just record at home? Can't you just release it?
Yeah,
Yes
but we
and no.
want people to hear it.
Yeah, exactly. And you want curators and gatekeepers to listen to it. So while it is potentially possible that something you recorded in your bedroom or I recorded right here might be good, is it really going to be radio quality? Probably not. You're going to have to call in a professional at some point. Something in the mix, something in the mastering, something in the engineering. You're going to have a professional. Like, why do you think studios are so expensive? Like, they know things and they have gear that we don't have. Like, sure, I can record a bunch of stuff on my iPhone, but I also, and everyone who plays with me, we all play acoustic instruments, and there's a lot of nuance that goes into that. We're not just like programming something digitally and just popping it through like a filter or whatever. Like, we've got to know how to capture the guitar to sound good, how to capture my vocals to sound good. And that costs a lot of money. And then after all that's done, and I've spent all the money on that, I want to make sure people listen to it.
Right.
Otherwise, and this, because like when you and I did a record together a few years ago, I didn't hire a publicist because I didn't know that I needed to. I was of the mindset like, let's just put it on Spotify and see what happens. What happened? Nothing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. The whole Spotify thing, like an independent artist can put their music up on Spotify, on Bandcamp, just use DistroKid and it's done.
Yep.
But you get heard from being put on a playlist.
Mm-hmm.
And how does that happen? They don't do that out of the goodness of their heart. There's a whole, like, we could do a whole episode on the politics behind getting on the Spotify playlists. But I specifically wanted to ask you about touring, so let's try to avoid going down that tangent.
Right.
So first question I want to ask you, because there was a lot made about Gojira and Monuments were complaining about merch cuts.
Yep.
You as an independent artist, you're not necessarily playing these big Live Nation venues. Like
Not all the
how,
time. Yeah.
yeah, how often would you say you got a merch cut at a venue?
I have. Do you want to know how often they're in my contract or how often they've been enforced? Or do you want to know both? Because that's also very interesting.
The enforcement thing is something that I hadn't thought to ask, so I definitely want to ask that. But I mainly was meaning like, if you played 100 gigs,
Yep.
how many of them had a merch cut across the country? Because you're doing everything from like straight up music venues to
Yep.
bars to like
Yep.
private parties. You're doing all the different kinds of gigs.
You got it. I think if I think really hard, so I've played about 50 shows this year, like through the last like 3 months. I think that I only had to settle up and actually pay up for a merch cut 3 times.
Interesting.
You want to know how many contracts had them in there? At least 65% of my contracts said that
Wow.
they were going to, yeah. So that's been a very interesting thing for me because I hate it when I get a contract, and I have had contracts. Typically a bar won't do it. Like if I'm doing, like, I call these like gas money gigs. If I'm playing at a bar that's like not a ticketed event, it's not like a whatever, I just have a guarantee and I'm the music for the night. They typically won't do it. I think probably because they're like margins, they know what their margins are. But if I've even had performing arts centers do merch cuts, and that was super surprising to me because performing arts centers are like funded by grants and they're usually very artist friendly. And the fact that they wanted a little cut of my meager little merch table, I was like, are you for real? Like, really? And those are some of the ones I actually had to settle up with. And that was like, oh my. Um, yeah, the venues, like when I have played Live Nation venues, when I've been out with other artists, I got out of one once because it was in Maine. And when I said from stage that I had been born in Maine, then when I went down to settle up, they were like, you were born in Maine. We're not going to take a cut from you. We're going to consider you local. And so they said their policies, they won't take a cut from a local band. So that worked out for me in that favor. But it's also a little, you see?
I mean, that's so arbitrary if you're going to
Uh
host
huh.
touring musicians. I mean, that was one of
Yeah.
the things we used to
Yeah.
always complain about is as local guys, we couldn't get on to the nice venues.
Yep.
I
Yeah.
was
So
the
go ahead.
nicest venues I played has been on the road because like for some reason, if you come into town, they're like, oh, it's a touring act.
I remember that was the thing that we used back when we were in a band together. And let me tell you what, like it works. Like I was selling out venues in cities I had never even been to this summer, and that was an amazing feeling. Whereas here, like, so I live in Vermont now, right? And like I did sell out a show here, one of the Vermont shows I had, but yeah, another one, like people, they don't, but it's also a timing issue. I moved here a year before the pandemic. People don't know that I'm here. And so then they forget. And then, but it's like, it's not like I can consistently sell out shows where I'm based right now. So yeah. But as far as like venues, yeah, most of my contracts stipulate at least a 10% cut, sometimes up to 30. And I would usually push back and be like, do you know how much it's going to cost me to get to your venue? Can we not do this? But most of them, thank my lucky stars, just had the decency when it came to the end of the night to hand me my check, shake my hand, and just walk away and not ask me the awkward questions. It is such a demeaning experience to have a venue come over to you after a wonderful show and be like, that was amazing. That was so wonderful. Here's your check. So how much did you sell? And you literally have to hand over like a $5 bill. It is like, is that worth it?
Yeah.
Like, yeah. Oh, it feels
Yeah.
icky.
So
Yeah.
and this is anecdotal because to do a proper study, I would need to interview 30 musicians, but
You
you
got
kind
it.
of confirmed a suspicion that I had.
Yeah.
Gojira is only playing big venues.
Yep.
You know, I was like, man, I played a lot of fucking bars. I've never, ever given a merch cut.
Exactly.
So I was thinking maybe these independent ones aren't doing it as much, but at the same time, I could believe it because the independent venues are really struggling post pandemic. So they're
Yeah.
looking for more revenue sources. And if we allow merch cuts to become a best practice in the industry, then the battle is lost.
Yeah, I do think that it's a new thing. I mean, it also could be again like a timing thing. Like so for me, encountering merch cuts in my contracts is a newer thing, but I'm also playing bigger venues than I used to before, so I'm not sure like yeah, is it because I've leveled up, or is it, the venues are looking for ways to make back money? But in my mind, when I look at it, like, right, like the bars aren't usually doing it, it's usually strictly venues. But it just seems like such an awkward arrangement because they're typically, and again, this is without interviewing every single venue, but their standpoint is typically like, well, we give you a place to sell your merch, like think of it as like a rental fee. But I'm like, okay, but if they offer me a seller, I will always decline. I do not need a seller. Every time I've had somebody sell my stuff for me, they've messed something up royally, and that's me being very gentle. So I would prefer to sell everything myself unless I bring a seller with me. And then, yeah, beyond that, it's like, is my $10 or like, so say that I sold, so there was one show where like I sold tons of merch. So and again, I'm a small independent artist, but for me, like $500 of merch in one night is a good night. And so if somebody had a 30% cut of that, that's $150. And so that's my hotel for the night. Usually merch is what gets me from place to place. And that's what's hard for me. Most nights I'm not selling $500 worth of merch. Most nights, it's more like $100 to $200. But that, again, that's my travel money, my food money, my hotel money, because most venues aren't giving me lodging. Sometimes they have to fight me or I have to fight them for food. So it's like, it's a little ridiculous that they want to take that little cut and just be like, okay, well, we're going to take $25 out of the 100 you made today. And that's going to fix our bottom line.
Yeah.
I'm like,
yeah.
is that really going to make a difference? Really?
I mean,
like,
when this issue first came up, my stance was no. There should be zero merch cuts.
Zero merch cuts.
There's this other YouTube channel called Tank the Tech, and he's a tour manager. He's been a roadie for a lot of different big bands, and he does a lot of these like behind the scenes videos. Like, this is what I encounter as a tour manager, as a roadie. Like, really great content. And he brought up something that I was like, okay, I can see that. And you touched on it just now. Like, if you're selling your own merch, zero merch cut.
Yep.
If the venue provides somebody to sell your merch for you, okay, I could see them wanting a little money to pay that person's wages for the evening.
Sure.
30% is way too fucking much.
Well, that's
10%, I can get it, or a flat fee, I could even get it. But typically, 30%, that's fucking crazy.
30% is out of control because that also varies widely with how much. So like I've opened for, again, I'm not going to name names here because I don't want to throw anyone under the bus, but I've opened for like really big bands that have like sold out shows, and like they're at the end of the night, I mean, they're counting in the tens of thousands of dollars that they have sold that night. Versus me, if I headlined the same venue, it wouldn't be that much because I haven't been around for 20 years and people don't know who I am and they're not just buying whatever I got. And so that is just a wild fluctuation there too. Like one night the venue might be making $10 on a merch cut, and then the next night they might be making $1,000 on the merch cut. And that I feel is also like unfairly punishing the artists, like for stupid reasons. Like most of the contracts I see, they'll offer a seller and it'll be a flat fee. Typically it's a flat fee much higher than I'm even going to sell my merch for. So I'm like, yeah, no, nobody needs to sit there for that. So when we're talking about independent venues and how they will take merch cuts, and Live Nation venues will do merch cuts, but bars won't. What I've heard, again, without naming names, is that some bars, the reason that they just do like flat guarantees for bands and they don't do merch cuts and stuff is that instead of looking at it as a night by night financial situation, I guess, like they don't look at the night and be like, well, nobody came out tonight, so we made no money, so we're not going to pay you. Some of these venues will look at their like the week, and they're like, we know how much money we have to make for the week as a whole in order to be good. And they average it out, and that's how they're able to bring in new bands, not do merch cuts, stuff like that. And I was like, if every venue did that, this would be such a better playing field. But I feel like right now there's this not quite scarcity mindset, but there's almost like this fear that it's like, if every night is not a blockbuster night, then the venue is like, oh my God, we're going to go under. There's a lot of presenters right now who are like, we're not going to bring in any unknown bands because our crowds aren't back to pre-COVID levels. And to me, I'm like, so you think that more people are going to come out to see the same old bands than,
right.
Like.
Yeah, it's short-sighted. Like, in my community, I've seen the death of the open mic. And,
yes,
I understand from a business standpoint, open mics don't make your club any money,
Yep.
because it's only the musicians who are cheap as fuck and their girlfriends. And
Yeah,
so,
you and
yeah,
I aren't going to go out there, like expecting to hear the next like Metallica, right? We might,
right.
but we're probably not going to spend our Wednesday night doing that if we have something else to do. Yeah.
But you need the open mics to foster the community and get the next generation, because that cover band that you can rely on in 10 years is not going to be together anymore.
Exactly, exactly. And what if people get real tired of hearing the same band at your venue every Friday night? That's going to happen. Your crowd is going to go somewhere else when something new and exciting happens. Like you need to keep your finger on the pulse of what's going on musically. Like, right, I understand as a venue, it is a risk to put a new musician in there and like charge a cover or whatever, but like work it out.
Yeah.
The thing that you've probably seen on social and I've posted a lot about and I agree with is that like when it comes to merch cuts, if a venue wants to do a merch cut with me, I'm more than happy to do that if they're going to split the bar with me. Because maybe I brought in only 10 people, right? Say that I'm in a new city and no one knows who I am and I only brought in 10 people. But say I sang my whiskey songs all night and people were pounding on the booze and they bought the equivalent of what 50 people would have bought. And so the bar thought they were going to have a garbage night and they just like went through the roof. But I don't get any of that. And then they still come to me at the end and want my merch money. But only 10 people are there to buy merch. And so it's really unfair. But then they would have like a blockbuster night, but then they still might be like, well, our ticket sales were low, so we're not going to book you again. But
Yeah.
you still made way more money than you thought you were going to make that night. So yeah, it's almost like a lose-lose. There was a whole article I read recently. I'll actually send it to you. I should have sent it to you before we met. But talking about how like all of the different pieces in the music industry all have different goals and the goals are literally at odds with each other. And so like
Mm-hmm.
labels and publicists and musicians and venues all need different things, and for them to all succeed, nobody nobody wins. Like everyone else has to lose in order for each to meet their goals. It's really ridiculous.
Yeah. Yeah. The infrastructure is not aligned properly. And that's that's putting it generously if you don't
Yeah.
even factor in all the scumbags in the industry.
Oh my God.
But I
Yeah.
mean, that's a whole other
That's a discussion
podcast.
for the next time.
Yeah. So, one thing that's come to my attention recently is I had no idea how many of the venues Live Nation owns. Like,
Yeah.
the big venues, I knew. Like, I know in Atlanta, the Coca-Cola Roxy is a Live Nation venue. What
Yep.
I didn't know is they bought up a lot of the 1,000-seat venues around the country, and
Yep.
they don't change the name. They they still kind of let them operate as a quasi
Yeah.
independent venue,
Yep.
but the overall policies are still determined by Live Nation, and the money
Hmm.
still funnels up to Live Nation. So I was curious, like, how many venues did you book on this tour? And then you go, oh shit, this is a Live Nation venue. I didn't know that.
Yeah, this tour, I actually played. I'm very proud to say this one was all independent. But earlier, before, so like last year and in the last 2 years, I've definitely had venues where I like, yeah, the name was still an independent venue, and I would show up, and then like when I would be doing the settlement at the end, it would be a Live Nation check, and I was like,
Yeah.
interesting. Usually for me, again, like at my level, like you said, 1,000-seat venues. So I'm typically playing in like the 250 seat venue if I'm headlining myself. So I'll be playing Live Nation venues more if I'm like out with a bigger band or a more well-known name. But even on the consumer side, right? So like my dad hit me up the other day to see if I wanted to go see a show with him in Boston, and it is what used to be a small independent theater, and now it is owned by, I don't remember if it was Live Nation or some other like ticket conglomerate, but like, yeah, their policies are all different. You can't call and talk to somebody about anything. Like the tickets have fees. Like it is a much different experience than it was like last time I went to that venue. And I'm like, okay. And so there's Live Nation made the case where they're like, well, we bailed out all these venues. Like we kept these independent venues
I
alive.
mean, it's kind of true.
Uh-huh. But the flip side is that the actual independent venues and owners are like, But how do we compete with that? Because Live Nation can afford to lose money, whereas maybe a truly independent venue cannot. And I don't know how to answer that question because I honestly don't think that Live Nation is willing to lose money. Like, I don't find Live Nation being super, door opening and opportunity creating for smaller independent bands. Like, they don't care. And it's more the independent venues who are doing that. But they're the ones who are at most risk of bringing in unknown bands or having a band have an off night and that throws off their budget for the week. And so that's where it's goes back to what we said earlier about being short-sighted. Like, this industry, you really need to have a long game and you really need to look at the big picture, because the short-sighted day-by-day calculations and stuff are not, they're not going to help anybody survive, band or venue or even artist. I mean, right now, I know it's kind of a little bit off track, but a lot of fans are not buying tickets in advance like they used to. Whether people are waiting because they don't know if they're going to get COVID or they don't want to book themselves out or whatever, we don't know. But since 2020, hardly any stuff. I mean, like Bob Dylan, sure, but like me, so like my sold out shows were selling out hours before the show, not weeks, not days, hours. And my ticket sales were slow up until crunch time. And that's been a thing too, because some of the musicians that I toured with this summer, like the headliners, their shows would get canceled due to low ticket sales. and trying to convince people, like, you've got to buy your tickets in advance or else there won't be a show. And people don't realize that either. Like, that aspect of it takes a village. If people aren't buying the tickets, there will be no show. And then there's going to be no venue because the venues are going to have to keep canceling all their shows.
Yeah, I don't know how to fix that one because you can't really have a policy that the fans abide by. There's no mechanism.
No.
But you did bring up something that I did want to touch on.
Yeah.
You talked about Live Nation bailing out the independent venues.
Yep.
And part of what sparked this discussion was the On the Road Again program.
Yes.
Where all the small Live Nation venues are going to eliminate merch cuts. Great thing.
Great.
And they're going to give you a check for playing there. What was it?
Yep.
$1,500?
$1,500 for your travel and lodging. Yeah.
And it's so it first came out and the whole community was hooray,
yeah,
this is amazing, this is great. Yep. And then articles started coming out saying, hey, wait a minute, this is only for 90 days, it's temporary, it's not as good as you think it is. And I'm like, still pretty fucking good. Yeah. It's more than what we had before.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And if it's successful, like maybe they'll do it again. Okay. Yeah. So then I saw an art because like I saw all these people going, it's bad actually. Is it?
Right.
Like it seems pretty fucking good to me.
Yeah.
But I did see one argument. I'm like, ooh, okay, that makes sense. So if Live Nation does this and all the independent venues can't afford to do that, they can't afford to eliminate merch cuts. They can't afford to pay no-name artists 15, like especially you got a 4-band bill, you got to pay them all $1,500.
Yeah.
That's a big check.
That's a big check.
And so
that's going to eliminate a lot of things, but yes, keep going. Yeah.
So the argument is that Live Nation is the program is going to, this is a conspiracy theory. I fucking hate conspiracy theories without evidence. But this is a podcast, so let's just talk about it.
Exactly.
The conspiracy theory is that Live Nation is doing this because they can't afford to. The small venues can't. And therefore, it will put a hurting on the small venues. And then Live Nation could come in and move them on out. The old Walmart strategy.
Exactly. And I've heard that too. And I've heard, so yeah, again, like because I didn't play any Live Nation venues this summer, I can't personally like speak to it, but I can say of the Live Nation venues I've played in the past, that 15 hundo would have been so choice because those tended to be the shows where I had my whole band too, where it wasn't just me. Like 1,500. So if you've seen, some of my calculations, like I need to be, even as an independent solo artist, I need to make about $1,000 per show in order to make minimum wage and cover my costs and make sure that I can get from show to show. But a lot of venues can't afford even $1,000 as my base, like guarantee. So I cannot imagine that these independent venues can shell out a guarantee plus a $1,500 check for food and lodging. Like that is just, and so I do agree that Live Nation doing that is going to make people want to only play Live Nation. But I also think there's another part to that, which you may have thought of and just not had time to talk to. But not only will that Walmartization kind of get rid of independent venues, it's also going to get rid of independent musicians because we're going to have no place to play. If a Live Nation venue is going to be like, well, in order for us to spend that much money on you, like we need to know who you are and you need to have a following and you need to have a label and we need to have blah, blah, blah.
You need to have
So
this
then,
many monthly Spotify listeners.
yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so where are the independent artists going to play? And it's almost like it's going to go back to like the big four record label industry that it was, 20 years ago. And so that is scary for me as an independent artist. Where am I going to play? Because like, I'm not going back to singing at farmers markets and stuff. Like that's not, that's not my jam. I need to be in these like concert halls and listening rooms and music venues where people are going to enjoy music, performing arts centers. But if Live Nation sets this industry standard without the infrastructure in place to make it sustainable, what's going to happen?
Good
Yeah.
point. So
Yeah.
we only got 10 minutes left. So let's pivot real quick because I do want to
Yes.
talk about the math that you've been putting on social media.
Yeah.
You just touched on it. You need to make $1,000 a night to make minimum wage. And
Yep.
so a lot of musicians would hear that and go, what? Because to them, if they play a gig and they make $1,000, that's like way more than they've ever made before.
Uh-huh.
But when you're on tour, like you don't teleport to the next venue.
Nope.
So break down
Unfortunate.
some of these numbers for, because that's not, you need to make $1,000 to be good. That's $1,000 to make minimum wage.
Minimum wage. Yep. And yeah, so it's, I guess if I want to get like real technical, it was something like $795 to make minimum wage and $975 to make a living wage in my area, which is a low cost of living area, which I mean, that to me is a minimal difference. So let's go with 1,000. So that breakdown is based on playing 150 shows a year, which is reasonable as an independent artist, being on the road 200 days a year because of travel, because as you noted, I can't teleport yet. I do not drive a hybrid because hybrids are really fucking expensive. So I drive a regular old gas powered car that I got to fill up at gas stations. I have to eat. I have to find a place to sleep. I have to put gas in the car. I have to buy merch. I literally had to buy more merch on the road because I sold out, which woo woo, but shit ain't cheap. And so trying to put all of those costs into being like, okay, well, if I'm working, because again, I only get paid when I'm on stage. So that's 50 days or 150 days a year that I get paid. So breaking that down into the numbers of like, all right, how many hours, if it was working full time, blah, blah, blah. So $1,000 per show for me would cover my travel costs, lodging costs, my merch costs, help with marketing, help with basic routine maintenance for my car, for my instruments, whatever. It's not going to cover if I have a recording and a release in the same year. It's not going to cover that. That will help if I've got a recording 1 year, then I've got some time, and then a release, because I would have to save money based on that model in order to do so. And when I throw out numbers like, oh, it costs, $100,000 to do a proper release, people think I'm insane. I'm like, you don't understand, like, yeah, the true costs of things. And so that's kind of how I look at it. I'm like, when people look at musicians and they're like, what do you do for a real job? Like, that's just such a horrible thing. Like, I think you and I and so many people grew up and were told playing music isn't a real job. And it is. I can attest to the fact that being a touring musician is a job. My favorite thing in the world is getting on stage and playing music and singing to people every night. But it's everything in between that is work. I have to book the shows, get to the shows, market the shows, promote the shows, write the songs, practice the material. Like, there's a lot behind the scenes. It's not just the 3 hours you see me on stage. There's so much more that goes into it. And like, I didn't even think of counting any of that as paid. All I'm basing this on is I only get paid when I'm on stage. And there's so much unpaid work.
Yeah, I told my son that being a musician is the easiest, hardest job in the world. It's
Yep.
like to be an accountant is easy. And accountants
Yeah.
everywhere are going to be furious because of all the hard work they do, especially during tax season. But what I
Yep.
mean is to become a musician, there's no path. You just
No.
work your ass off. It takes up every waking hour. You
Mm-hmm.
starve most of the time while you're trying to
Mm-hmm.
make it. Like
Mm-hmm.
you have to build your following over a long period of time, and there's no guarantee it's ever going to happen.
Nope.
To be an accountant, you go to college, you get your degree, you apply for a job, you're an accountant. That's how
There
you
you
do it.
go. Yep.
It
Yep. And I think so that hits on a really big point for me is that like every day I work so hard and then I look around and it's like, I can't see the results of my work, right? If I write a song, that's one thing, but most of the time my work is kind of invisible. Nobody sees it. Like, and I never know if it's the right stuff. And that's the worst. Like, there is no playbook. There is no like master plan. And there are plenty of people out there. I guess this is more like a cautionary tale. There are plenty of people out there who will tell you that they will sell you their course on how to be an independent musician. Do not give them your money. Don't waste your money. Because nobody really knows what's going to work for you. And that is one of the most frustrating things that I have heard over my career because I'm like, tell me how you did it. And they're like, but it won't work for you because every musician is different. And I'm like, ah. So I just have to kind of follow myself and be like, all right, well, this is what works for me. So I tend to get the most new followers on Spotify and connect with people most in person. So for me, it's more important to be out in person and playing live shows. Live streams, I don't know what it is, but people don't seem to like super connect with me over the computer, probably because they're just like, oh, it's another white lady playing guitar. I get it. Come to a show and you'll see, there's a little more to it. But I can only be in one place at one time. And that is another challenging aspect of like where that $1,000 figure comes in for me. Because yeah, if I could be in a bunch of places at once, that figure would be lower. Well, maybe not because I'd still need the gas and the hotels and all that.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's tough to put everything into it and be like, I think I'm on the right path. We don't ever really know. And hopefully there will come a tipping point at some point that's like, okay, this is sustainable. Like what I'm doing is working. But I almost feel like it's going to be one of those really subtle shifts where like I'm not going to see it happen. I'm just going to like wake up a couple months later and be like, oh, that worked. This is working.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's what I keep saying. Like musicians need to be able to make money. Because, when we were kids, we went out and played shows for free and we starved and it was, fine.
It was great. We got no sleep, no money, no food. It was amazing.
Yeah. But eventually, in order to keep doing that, the opportunity cost, it would just be better to just go get a minimum wage job where you don't have to travel and then you stop making the music. So in order for people to get the music that they love, musicians got to make money. So fight back when your local venues are doing merch cuts, buy tickets in advance, buy merch, stream, add to playlists. And speaking of, because we got 2 minutes left, where can people find you? You got an EP out and an album upcoming.
You got it. Yeah. So my website is sarahkingsings.com and that's SARAH kingsings.com. I've got all my links to Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon, YouTube. Everything is on there. Recently released a few songs from the forthcoming album. It's full band. It's a little more like Southern rock and less broody and moody than the EP was. So yeah, find me on like Instagram and Facebook and Twitter, which I don't even know what it's called now, but
all the links will be in the description.
All of the links are at the bottom of my website. Always go there. And the best thing people can do if I'm not coming to your city and you can't buy my merch, sign up for my email list. It is free. And that will make sure that we are connected regardless of algorithms. And my last little pitch is if you find venues in your community are doing merch cuts, do not be one of those people who's like, we're not going to buy merch until you get rid of them. No, buy the merch because if you stop buying merch, that's going to hurt the artists even more. Buy the merch, yell at the venue, but don't take it out on the artists. Do not protest and hurt us in the process.
Very good. And to my audience, I normally talk about metal. Sarah's not really metal per se, but most of her songs are about murder. She's got metal covers, and we toured with a metal band back in the day. You also did one of their songs, which is excellent. It's called Devil's Try. Y'all check out Sarah King. We're running out of time, so I'm just going to say bye.
Bye. Thanks for having me again.
Hey, whoa. The podcast isn't over yet. If you made it this far, Thank you so much. I really appreciate it, but there's something I need to tell you. So, the original plan was for this podcast to air next week because this past weekend I covered my friend's band Lions at the Gate, who opened for Fear Factory and Lacuna Coil, and how awesome that was for him and for me to see my friends doing well. And then I also did concert photography at the Wolves in the Throne Room and Black Braid and Gay Area show. And if you follow me on social media, you will have seen that I went through a series of disasters this weekend, and I had to handle putting out all of those fires. But thankfully, I already had this episode recorded with Sarah. So I guess I put this one out now because I literally right up until Monday night have been putting out fires, could not work on recording or editing or anything. So I just put this one out with Sarah that I was supposed to do next week. And next week, I will bring you what happened this weekend. I'll tell you the story of all the disasters. I'll show you the pictures from the concerts, talk about my friend making it in the big time. Maybe we'll do 2 episodes, a bonus episode. Depends on how much catching up I have to do this week. So make sure you're subscribed to catch that. Enjoy the riff of the week. And most importantly, read philosophy, listen to metal. I love you.